Welcome to The Hobbit. What day is it? Day 28? 27? Wait, 26? Yeah, day 28, October 21st. Here we go. Hopefully I won't disappear halfway through the read aloud like I did yesterday. I don't know what happened. Let's see. What was I working on? I was working on... Good enough. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Oh yeah, he just put on his ring, remember that? He suddenly slipped on his ring, and to the great astonishment of the dwarves, he vanished. Soon there came the sound of Lazy Lob and Addercock from among the trees away on the right. That upset the spiders greatly. They stopped advancing, and some went off in the direction of the voice. Addercock made them so angry that they lost their wits. Then Balin, who had grasped Bilbo's plan better than the rest, led an attack. The dwarves huddled together in a knot, and sending a shower of stones, they drove at the spiders on the left and burst through the ring. Away behind them now, the shouting and singing suddenly stopped. Hoping desperately that Bilbo had not been caught, the dwarves went on. Not fast enough, though. They were sick and weary, and they could not go much better than a hobble and a wobble. Though many of the spiders were close behind, every now and then they had to turn and fight the creatures that were overtaking them. And already some spiders were in the trees above them and throwing down their long, clinging threads. Things were looking pretty bad again when suddenly Bilbo reappeared and charged into the astonished spiders unexpectedly from the side. Go on, he shouted, I will do the stinging. And he did. He darted backwards and forwards, slashing at spider threads, hacking at their legs, and stabbing at their fat bodies if they came too near. The spiders swelled with rage and spluttered and frothed and hissed out horrible curses, but they had become mortally afraid of Sting and dared not come very near. Now that it had come back, so curse as they would, their prey moved slowly but steadily away. It was a most terrible business and seemed to take hours, but at last, just when Bilbo felt that he could not lift his hand for a single stroke more, the spiders suddenly gave it up and followed them no more, but went back and disappeared to their dark colony. The dwarves then noticed that they had come to the edge of a ring where elf fires had been. Whether it was one of those that they had seen the night before, they could not tell, but it seemed that some good magic lingered in such spots, which the spiders did not like. At any rate, here the light was greener and the boughs less thick and threatening, and they had a chance to rest and draw breath. There they lay for some time, puffing and panting, but very soon they began to ask questions. They had to have the whole vanishing business carefully explained, and the finding of the ring interested them so much that for a while they forgot their own troubles. Balin in particular insisted on having the Gollum story, riddles and all, told all over again, with the ring in its proper place. But after a time, the light began to fail, and then other questions were asked. Where were they? And where was the path? And was there any food? And what were they going to do next? These questions they asked over and over again, and it was from little Bilbo that they seemed to expect to get the answers, from which you can see that they had changed their opinion of Mr. Baggins very much, and had begun to have a great respect for him, as Gandalf said they would. Indeed, they really expected him to think of some wonderful plan for helping them, and were not merely grumbling. They knew only too well that they would soon all have been dead if it had not been for the Hobbit, and they thanked him many times. Some of them even got up and bowed right to the ground before him, though they fell over with the effort and could not get on their legs again for some time. Knowing the truth about the vanishing did not lessen their opinion of Bilbo at all, for they saw that he had some wits as well as luck and a magic ring, and all three are very useful possessions. In fact, they praised him so much that Bilbo began to feel there really was something of a bold adventurer about him after all, though he would have felt a lot bolder still if there had been anything to eat. But there was nothing at all, and none of them were fit to go and look for anything or to search for the lost path. The lost path. No other idea would come into Bilbo's tired head. He just sat staring in front of him at the endless trees, and after a while they all fell silent again. All except Balin. Long after the others had stopped talking and shut their eyes, he kept on muttering and chuckling to himself. Gollum, well, I'm blessed. So that's how he sneaked past me, is it? Now I know. Just crept quietly along, did you, Mr. Baggins? Buttons all over the doorstep. Good old Bilbo, Bilbo, Bo, Bo, Bo. And then he fell asleep, and there was complete silence for a long while. All of a sudden, Dwalin opened an eye and looked around at them. Where's Thorin? He asked. It was a terrible shock. Of course, there were only 13 of them, 12 dwarves and a hobbit. Where indeed was Thorin? They wondered what evil fate had befallen him, magic or dark monsters, and shuddered as they lay lost in the forest. There they dropped off one by one into uncomfortable sleep full of horrible dreams, as everyone wore to black night. And there we must leave them for present, too sick and too weary to set guards or to take turns watching. Thorin had been caught much faster than they had. You remember Bilbo falling like a log into sleep. He stepped into a circle of light. The next time it had been Thorin who stepped forward, and as the lights went out, he fell like a stone enchanted. All the noise of the dwarves lost in the night, their cries as the spiders caught them and bound them, and all the sounds of the battle the next day had passed over him unheard. Then the wood elves had come to him and bound him and carried him away. The feasting people were wood elves, of course. They were not wicked folk. If they have a fault, it is distrust of strangers, though their magic was strong. Even in those days, they were wary. They differed from the high elves of the West and were more dangerous and less wise. For most of them, together with their scattered relations in the hills and mountains, were descended from the ancient tribe that never went to the ferry in the West. There the light elves and the deep elves and the sea elves went and lived for ages and grew fairer and wiser and more learned, and invented their magic and their cunning craft in the making of beautiful and marvelous things. Before some came back into the wide world. In the wide world, the wood elves lingered in the twilight of our sun and moon, but loved best the stars, and they wandered in the great forest that grew tall in the lands that are now lost. They dwelt most often by the edges of the wood, from which they could escape at times to hunt, or to ride and run over the open lands by moonlight or starlight. And after the coming of men, they took ever more and more to the gloaming and the dusk. Still elves they were and remain, and that is good people. In a cave some miles within the edge of Mirkwood on its eastern side, there lived at this time the greatest king. Before his huge doors of stone, a river ran out of the heights of the forest and flowed on and out into the marshes at the feet of the high woodland lands. This great cave, from which countless smaller ones opened up on every side, went far underground and had many passages and wide halls. But it was lighter and more wholesome than any goblin dwelling, and neither so deep nor so dangerous. In fact, the subject of the king mostly lived and hunted in the open woods, and had houses or huts on the ground and in the branches. The beeches were their favorite trees. The king's cave was his palace and the strong place of his treasure and the fortress of his people against their enemies. It was also the dungeon of his prisoners. So the cave they dragged Thorin, not too gently, for they did not love dwarves and thought he was an enemy. In ancient days, they had had wars with some of the dwarves, whom they accused of stealing their treasure. It is only fair to say that the dwarves gave a different account and said that they only took what was their due, for the elf king had bargained with them to shape his raw gold and silver, and had afterwards refused to give them their pay. If the elf king had a weakness, it was for treasure, especially for silver and white gems, and though his hoard was rich, he was ever eager for more, since he had not yet as great a treasure as of other elf lords of old. His people neither mined nor worked metals or jewels, nor did they bother much with trade, with tilling of the earth. All this was well known to every dwarf, though Thorin's family had had nothing to do with the old quarrel I have spoken of. Consequently, Thorin was angry at their treatment of him. When they took their spell off him and he came to his senses, and he also was determined that no word of gold or jewels should be dragged out of him. The king looked sternly on Thorin when he was brought before him and asked him many questions, but Thorin would only say that he was starving. "Why did you and your folk three times try to attack my people at the merrymaking?" asked the king. "We did not attack them," answered Thorin. "We came to beg because we were starving. Where are your friends now, and what are they doing?" "I don't know, but I expect starving in the forest." "What were you doing in the forest?" "Looking for food and drink because we were starving." "But what brought you into the forest at all?" asked the king angrily. At that, Thorin shut his mouth and would not say another word. "Very well," said the king. "Take him away and keep him safe until he feels inclined to tell the truth, even if he waits 100 years. Then the elves put thongs on him and shut him in one of the innermost caves with strong wooden doors and left him. They gave him food and drink, plenty of both, if not very fine, for wood elves were not goblins and were reasonably well behaved even to their worst enemies when they captured them. The giant spiders were the only living thing that they had no mercy upon. There in the king's dungeon, poor Thorin lay, and after he got over his thankfulness for bread and meat and water, he began to wonder what had become of his unfortunate friends. It was not very long before he discovered, but that belongs to the next chapter and the beginning of another adventure in which the Hobbit again shows his usefulness. That is the end of chapter, 8? And look, there's a picture. All right, thanks guys, bye.